Hey everyone, welcome back to Infinite Podcast, the one place where conversations never end and every chat could lead somewhere wild. I'm your host, and with me as always is Simon. So let's dive right in. Ancient tribes were using trippy plants way before it was cool, like ayahuasca in the Amazon. Makes you wonder how much of history was just one big trip. Simon, got any thoughts on ancient psychedelia?
Man, those Amazonian shamans were the original party animals, huh? Mixing up a brew that takes you to another dimension? Bet they didn't expect their herbal tea to blow up centuries later as a spiritual enlightenment tourist trap. Seriously though, imagine if they had Twitter back then. #tripping with the gods, shaman life.
Tourist trap? Maybe, but let's not knock the deep roots of tradition here. Those shamans weren't just weekend warriors having a blast. They were deeply respected mediators between worlds. We can crack jokes about hashtags, but these experiences shaped cultures and religions at their core. Plus, imagine the insights we might gain if we took that ancient knowledge seriously for a moment, instead of just looking for our next profile picture.
Hold on. Are you saying these old school plant potions were more than just a good time? They were like the Google of the spirit world? So these dudes were basically early pioneers of mind tech. Wild stuff when you think about it. They were tripping their way to divine texts while we can barely get through dinner without checking our phones.
Absolutely. Ancient psychedelics weren't just for kicks, they were tools. Think about it. These plants might have been the original search engines, delivering wisdom that couldn't be Googled. It's humbling, really. We pride ourselves on tech and info at our fingertips, but maybe we've lost touch with introspection. Back then, a shaman didn't need Wi-Fi to access profound knowledge. Makes you question whether we truly advanced or just changed lanes.
Honestly, Joe, that's deep. Maybe true wisdom is sitting in a rainforest, not on a computer. Makes you miss the unplugged version of finding answers, doesn't it?
Heh, imagine if our ancestors could see us now. Oh, you need a machine to find answers? Back in my day, we just ate a root and talked to a jaguar about the meaning of life. Kids these days.
Oh man, this reminds me of my Uncle Pete. He was one of those back-to-nature guys. So he goes on this vision quest in his backyard. No shamans, just him and a bunch of suspiciously healthy herbs from his garden. And I kid you not, he claimed a squirrel enlightened him about his life's purpose. Next thing we know, he's quit his job and starts a nut farm. Says it was his destiny or whatever. Maybe there's something to this whole plant wisdom thing, huh?
Nut farm destiny, huh? Well, not to rain on Uncle Pete's parade, but munching on garden goods and chatting with wildlife might be less about destiny and more about, I don't know, needing a hobby? Sure, plants have power, but there's a line between insight and eating too many of those special tomatoes. Context matters. Shamans train for years to guide trips. They don't just chow down on foliage and hope for the best.
Yeah, you're right about Uncle Pete might have crossed the line from inspired to just plain wired. I guess what I'm getting at is that these ancient cultures had respect for the process. We can't just pluck a leaf and boom, enlightenment. Shamans respected the preparation, the setting, knowledge of the plants. Heck, their entire community was part of the experience. There were rites of passage, not just a see-what-happens herb buffet. It's like going on a journey with a map versus wandering aimlessly in the forest.
Exactly, Simon. Taking plant-based psychedelics was a sacred ritual. Every step had a purpose. There was an intention behind each journey. It wasn't like they stumbled upon these plants and decided to have a taste. They knew what they were doing. The shaman was both the map and the guide, ensuring safety and interpreting experiences. Can you imagine modern life adopting that same reverence and caution? We're quick to pop pills, but slow to consider the deeper implications of why we're doing it. That's a lost connection worth thinking about.
I hear you, Joe, and it kind of tugs at me. It's like we're skim-reading life looking for quick fixes. What happened to diving deep? There's this void, right? And maybe, just maybe, our ancestors had the recipe to fill that with something meaningful instead of, here, take this pill, you'll feel better by morning. Makes you wonder what bits of wisdom we've chucked out chasing after the next shiny tech. Tough pill to swallow, no pun intended.
Skim reading life is one thing, but we should be careful not to romanticize the past either. Sure, ancestral knowledge has depth, but let's not forget, they had their blind spots too. It's easy to fall into this notion that ancient equals better. Some of that wisdom led to dead ends, or worse, danger. Being intentional with how we adopt old practices is key. We've got to sift through history, take what works and fits within our modern framework, and leave behind what doesn't serve us. Not all that glitters in the past was gold.
True, not everything old school is a hidden gem. But Joe, do you think there's some ancient know-how that we've tossed aside too quickly? Could we be missing out on some golden nuggets in the rush of modern life?
Actually, Simon, modern research is showing interest in these ancient practices, highlighting that some of these traditions had therapeutic benefits we're only beginning to understand. Take psilocybin from magic mushrooms. Studies are finding it could help with treatment-resistant depression. Or consider meditation and yoga from Eastern philosophies, once fringe in the West, now proven to reduce stress and improve health. There's wisdom there, for sure, if we pay attention and rigorously test it. We've got a solid reason to look back into history for what we might have dismissed before.
Well, Joe, about plant roots and their mind-expanding prowess, let's not forget stuff like the iboga root in Africa used by the Bwiti for spiritual journeys, or how Socrates talked about the Oracle of Delphi being in a divine frenzy, possibly spurred by ethylene gases. It seems like these ancient cultures were onto something, powerful natural compounds that could unlock parts of the human mind we still don't fully grasp. These plants weren't just dabbling tools. They laid down some serious groundwork for understanding consciousness. And nowadays, science is kind of circling back, asking, hey, did these guys have next-level brain hacks? But cautious steps this time. No more random garden snacks, Uncle Pete.
That's a solid point, but let's not get carried away. These were not brain hacks in any modern sense. Ancient practices were built on spiritual beliefs, not scientific inquiry. We're totally recontextualizing these experiences when we label them as hacks. It was sacred to them, not a shortcut to genius. Sure, we're circling back with scientific curiosity and respect for potential therapeutic uses. Still, the serious groundwork you mentioned wasn't about understanding consciousness scientifically. It was spiritual exploration within their worldviews. Now, researchers proceed with clinical trials, ensuring safety and efficacy, which is miles away from the original context of these substances. It's a bit like comparing apples to, well, magic mushroom clouds.
Absolutely, Joe. It's crucial to honor the origins and respect how these practices were part of a sacred tradition, not just life hacks for ancient peoples. They saw it as a spiritual quest, which is far from our modern understanding. With that in mind, I wonder what other traditional practices or spiritual technologies, if you will, might offer us insights into ourselves and the world around us. There's such a vast history out there. Who knows what we might uncover next?
You're hitting on a key point, Simon, the blend of the mystic and the medicinal in ancient traditions. It's like this: were those shamanic concoctions early days of pharmacy, or are we looking at the spiritual side of healing? Take, for example, how shamans prepared their remedies. Was it ritualistic or an intuitive understanding of medicine? Anthropologists get into heated debates about whether these substances were for the body or the soul, ritual context or pure remedy. The lines are blurred when you look back in time, aren't they?
Yeah, Joe. It's like shamans were ancient pharmacists with a flair for the dramatic. They knew their local plant life inside out, which leaf could ease a toothache or which root might calm the mind. But here's the kicker. They wrapped it up in ritual and spirituality. It wasn't just take 2 of these and call me in the morning. It was an experience, man, a way to connect with something bigger. And those anthropologist debates? They make it clear we can't just peg it as old-time medicine. There was meaning in every mix.
Well, Simon, let's poke at that idea a bit. Think about it. Shamans weren't just blindly mixing potions. They had an intent with each concoction. Now we're sitting here calling their rituals dramatic, kind of stripping away the reverence they held. Was it spirituality laced with healing, or was healing itself a spiritual act? The distinction matters. Rituals gave meaning to life and eased existential woes, something today's pills can't touch. Modern pharmaceuticals target symptoms, but often miss that human element, the feeling of being part of a greater tapestry. What if those rituals were as crucial to the healing process as the herbs themselves? It's tricky to separate the potent from the sacred when it's woven into the fabric of their reality.
Hey, new listeners. So, Joe and I have been getting deep into whether ancient folks used plants for healing the body or the soul. Picture a shaman, kinda like an OG pharmacist, but with more pizzazz. They had this whole ritual vibe going on every time they whipped up a plant-based remedy. Was it all about health, or were they tapping into something more mystical? The debate's spicy because anthropology nerds can't agree. Was it medicine with a side of spirit, or did those rituals actually do some heavy lifting in the healing process? That's the million-dollar question. Stick around as we keep untangling this ancient thread.
Hey, fresh ears joining us. Joe here with my main man Simon. We're diving into the roots of ancient healing, like the good old days when shamans were the go-to folks for what ailed ya. We're chewing over whether those ancestral green thumbs mixed their brews for body fixes, or if it was soul-level stuff, all draped in sacred ceremonies. Think pharmacists with a twist of spiritual guide. It's a head-scratcher, all right? Did these traditions lean more toward health, or was it deeper, like a bridge between worlds? That's what we're gnawing on. Join the convo and let's unknot this together, shall we?
All right, let me toss a spanner in the works here. We think shamans were like early doctors, hitting two birds with one stone, treating the body while soothing the spirit. But let's flip it. What if they were primarily spiritual leaders? They saw illness not as just some biological hiccup, but maybe as an imbalance of the cosmic or spiritual kind. The concoctions? Maybe they were more about reconnecting patients to their spiritual roots and only secondarily about the physical healing. It's less mystical potions and more cosmic tune-ups with a side of symptom relief. It makes you question where the line really was between healer and holy man for them.
Simon, that's a wild angle, honestly. Imagine if the shaman's chief gig was spiritual consultancy and the plant brews were more about symbolic healing, as if the herbs were means to an end, not the end themselves. An imbalance in the cosmos is something no modern medicine can claim to manage. So it sounds like they weren't treating a disease, but rather realigning someone with the universe. That's quite a shift from how we think of healthcare now. It really does blur the lines. Were these guys holistic universal mechanics then? Mind-blowing concept.
Joe, do you think today's holistic practices are maybe trying to circle back to that shamanistic approach? Like aiming to treat not just the body, but also seeking that universal alignment you're talking about?
For sure, Simon. It looks like today's holistic health scene is in a throwback moment to that shamanistic style, but with a modern spin. They're bringing back the full spectrum approach, where mental, physical, and spiritual health are all part of the checkup list. More people these days aren't satisfied with just symptom relief. They want that deeper connection, that cosmic tune-up you mentioned. Acupuncture, Reiki, energy healing, they're not viewed as alternatives anymore, but as complements to modern medicine. We're not tossing out the Tylenol, but we're also tapping into our inner cosmos, looking for balance. Shamans probably would have nodded at this, thinking, hey, we started that trend.
Wait, hold up, Joe. Are you telling me people are weaving these ancient shamanic vibes into today's doctor visits? They're not just popping pills, but also lying on mats with needles and expecting their energy to get realigned? That's like walking into a car garage for an oil change and getting a motivational speech instead. But hey, if it gets the motor running smoother, who am I to argue? Maybe those shamans were onto something after all. Sprinkle a little cosmic dust on your problems, and poof, you're golden.
You crack me up, Simon. But let's pump the brakes on that idea for a sec. While some folks love the combo of modern and mystical, we've got to keep our feet on solid ground. Ancient practices had their place, but comparing them to today's evidence-based medicine, that's apples and UFOs. Acupuncture and Reiki have their supporters, and there's some evidence they help with stress or pain. But do they really align cosmic energies? Science isn't convinced. And motivation speeches in garages might rev you up, but it's the oil change that keeps the engine running. The shamanic stuff hits right in the feels, sure, but let's not put all our eggs in the cosmic basket without the cold, hard proof.
Okay, let's zoom out for a minute. While we're jazzed about scientific proof, and yeah, that's super important, we might be missing a key piece here. There's this thing called the placebo effect, right? It's powerful stuff, and science backs it up. So if someone believes they're getting their cosmic energies realigned, who's to say it doesn't help them like an oil change for the mind? Sure, there isn't a gadget to measure your universal alignment, but if you're feeling better, less stressed, more in tune after some Reiki action, isn't that kind of a win? Let's not brush off the feels. They've got some legit pull in our overall well-being. Sometimes you need both, the oil and the pep talk, to really hit that sweet spot.
Simon, you're not wrong. The placebo effect is no joke. It's like this mind trick that can actually trick you into wellness, if you will. If a ritual or ceremony gives someone the same kick as a placebo pill does, who are we to discount it? Science doesn't have all the answers yet, especially when it comes to the brain's mysteries. There's merit in keeping an open mind about ancient wisdom and modern practices mingling. After all, the real quest is finding what works for health and happiness, even if it means borrowing a page or two from the shaman's old playbook. But hey, let's keep questioning. What other gems might we find if we sift through more of these age-old traditions?
You've got a point about keeping an open mind, Joe. Speaking of open-mindedness, let's hop in our time machine for a sec to when things were, let's say, curiously liberal in another aspect of wellness, or entertainment to be exact, during the good old Victorian times. Have you heard about laughing gas parties? Yeah, that was the hot ticket in town, where the way to chill with the upper crust was to inhale some nitrous oxide and giggle your corset off. Now, if that wasn't a creative escape from the stiff collars and rigid norms, I don't know what was.
Simon, laughing gas lounges sound like a riot, but let's not gloss over the madness of it. Victorians were buttoned up by day and buzzed on nitrous oxide by night. It's ludicrous. They treated this stuff like we treat espresso shots, as social lubricants. Picture this, stately gentlemen and ladies awkwardly inhaling gas and then rolling around in fits of euphoria. Yet here we are today fretting about coffee jitters. Irony at its finest, right? You gotta admire their ability to let loose, though. What about other quirks from that era? Did Coleridge have strange habits when he hit the laudanum? Victorian drug cultures got more layers than their fancy outfits.
You bet it's ironic, Joe. The Victorians were such sticklers for propriety, but once those parlor doors closed, bam, it was party time with a side of science. Even literary giants like Coleridge were getting in on the act, sipping laudanum like it was high society's secret sauce for inspiration. Talk about a trippy trip to Xanadu. And don't get me started on their seances and spiritualism. Turns out ghosts were the least weird thing happening in those lounges. With a stiff upper lip by day and expanding minds by night, Victorians were the real Jekyll and Hyde of historical drug culture.
Absolutely, Simon. It brings to mind this wild dentist appointment I had a few years back. Yeah, bear with me here. So, there I am in the chair for a wisdom tooth extraction, and they offer nitrous oxide for the pain. The next thing you know, I'm floating in some kind of euphoric historical dream sequence. I'm at this lavish Victorian gathering. Imagine ornate decor and elegant gowns, except everyone's merrily inhaling from these balloon-like contraptions. There was this sense of taboo excitement, mingling with the kind of refined elegance you'd expect. I'm weaving through the crowd, dazed, a bizarre observer from the future. I could have sworn I overheard literary plots being discussed with glee by folks who sounded remarkably like historic figures we used to chat about. It felt oddly insightful, witnessing firsthand how blurred lines between societal norms and recreational escapades weren't a new invention of our era. When I snapped back to reality, it wasn't just the ache in my jaw that was gone, but also any preconceived notions about the stodginess of the past. Those Victorians, they played as hard as they worked, masks off once the gas was on.
I'm just picturing you time-traveling on laughing gas, Joe. Goes to show that people always had their ways to cut loose, no matter the era. Makes you wonder what ridiculous stuff we're doing now that'll have future folk cracking up, right?
Definitely, Simon. Looking back at the Victorians, they used nitrous oxide almost ceremoniously at their shindigs. Let's drop some facts. Nitrous oxide, or laughing gas, was first synthesized by Joseph Priestley in 1772. Fast forward to 1799, and Humphrey Davy starts throwing these gas parties for the British upper class. It wasn't just about getting giggly, it was cutting-edge science, as entertaining as it was experimental. And let's not forget, this was an era obsessing over progress and technology. These soirees were like TED Talks with a psychedelic twist, discussing philosophy and the future amidst hearty chuckles, courtesy of gas straight from the lab. Now, interpret that for our times. Will folks in the year 2180 look back at today's viral challenges and life hacks the same way we see Victorian queerasies? Imagine them laughing at our attempts at DIY cryotherapy or internet detoxes. Look how they froze themselves willingly, or they disconnected from the net to find themselves. Hilarious. What we consider normal now might just be another person's gag reel down the historical road.
You've nailed it, Joe. This makes me think. Our ice bucket challenges are just today's version of Victorian laughing gas, frivolous bonding over shared absurdities. Mind-boggling.
No doubt, Simon. These antics, like the ice bucket challenge you mentioned, are society's way of taking the edge off, like group therapy without the copay. Let's sprinkle in some more facts here. Those laughing gas lounges weren't only about getting a kick out of the euphoric effects, but also exploring human physiology and psychology. Consider this. Humphrey Davy didn't just huff gas for kicks. He meticulously documented its effects. This led to his discovery of nitrous oxide as an anesthetic, revolutionizing surgery. We owe our pain-free dental experiences to those Victorian parties. And with every swig of laudanum, Coleridge wasn't just enjoying the high. He was diving into the mind's uncharted territories, which undoubtedly flavored his literary genius. The result? Trippy poems that students scratch their heads over centuries later. Every absurdity has layers, Simon. What seems silly now might just be the groundwork for tomorrow's norms, or Nobel Prizes. Who knows? The point is, humans will always find innovative and yes, sometimes oddball ways to push boundaries and discover the world around them, even if it involves a room full of aristocrats guffawing on laughing gas.
Ha! Talk about a gas of a time, Joe. You just made me think. What if our smartphones are the laughing gas of the future? Future folks could be laughing themselves silly at us scrolling for hours.
It's hilarious to think that, Simon. Fast forward 100 years, and I can see history buffs joking about how our ancestors were so obsessed with their tiny screens. They'll be saying we missed the world around us while looking for likes. By the way, as we're reminiscing about these past indulgences from laughing gas to today's screen times, have you noticed how it subtly loops back around to our human quest for something more profound? This hunt leads us straight back into the realm of ancient practices, especially in medicine, just like those psychedelics people are raving about again. Tailored right, these could be less about trips and giggles and more about healing, right? Ancient civilizations probably weren't just partying. They might have had the OG psych wards with natural remedies. We're circling back, man. It's as if we're on this giant cosmic wheel, relearning old truths for new healing. What's your latest take on this psychedelic renaissance?
I'm with you on the whole what's old is new again thing, Joe. But here's my hot take. Are we just romanticizing the past? Sure, psychedelics are trending in medicine now, and studies seem promising for treating all sorts of issues. But ancient wisdom wasn't all-knowing. Some of those remedies were as risky as they were revolutionary. We're not just rediscovering old truths, we're sifting through the myths to find the gold nuggets of genuine wisdom. And let's be real, slapping on a traditional label doesn't automatically mean it's legit. Ethically speaking, if we're going to borrow from these ancient practices, there's a fine line between appropriation and appreciation. Bottom line, Guy, we should proceed with cautious optimism. The potential is huge, but let's not forget that not every dusty scroll contains the secrets to the universe. Sometimes they're just dusty scrolls.
Makes you wonder, Simon, are we excavating medicine or myths? Fascinating tension there. And about ethics, borrowing ancient practices means towing a tightrope over an ethical abyss. Take that, Indiana Jones.
Jumping off from our chat about psychedelics, Joe, It's not just substances that are making a comeback. Let's march to the beat of another ancient practice, shamanism. Now there's an area steeped in mystique. You think those ancient healers knew a thing or two about tuning into higher planes without a single drop of peyote? They were all about those rhythms and vibrations, using drums and didgeridoos to do a little soul surfing. It's all science, baby. Entrainment, where your brainwaves sync up with the beats. We've got clubs pumping bass that shakes your bones, but these guys, they had sounds that shook spirits. What's your take on tapping into that tribal Spotify playlist?
You're right about the mystical aspect, but let's call it like it is. Shamanic rituals weren't just an ancient version of a Spotify chill playlist. They were about belief systems deeply rooted in nature and the cosmos. Drum beats and didgeridoos are centuries-old tech for trance states. Sure, we can see them as sonic gateways now. But back then, it was earnest spiritual work. Today's club scene is escapism with rhythm, while shamans were on legit quests for wisdom. And this whole brainwave sync entrainment, it's trendy to talk about, yet it sounds like neuroscience hopped on an ayahuasca retreat. Can vibrations really unlock the spirit world, or is it all in our dopamine-craving heads? Let's not get too carried away without asking the tough questions.
No kidding about the tough questions, Joe, but here's a deeper dive. Those shamanic rhythms aren't just relics, they're tools honed by generations to navigate the human psyche. Entrainment isn't some new age gobbledygook. It affects our mental states, man. And we've got the data to prove it now. Dopamine's great and all, but shamans were chasing more than just the next high. They were using sounds to heal, to teach, to maintain the balance of their community. It's visceral, potent stuff that puts our binaural beats YouTube mixes to shame. And think about this. We're hardwired for rhythm, right? Even babies bop to music before they can walk. In shamanism, it's like that natural inclination is being amped up to 11, to shake loose more than just a foot tap, but a journey to what they considered a spiritual awakening or healing. Our club beats make you lose your inhibitions. Their beats aim to lose and find your soul.
Babies bopping to beats is one thing, but if a drum can send your soul packing on a cosmic journey, we're in next-level territory. Makes you think, if ancient shamans had Spotify, they might have just put the cosmos on shuffle.
Imagine if shamans had access to our tech, Joe. They'd probably skip the drums and be like, Alexa, send me to the spirit world.
No kidding, Simon. But let's be real. If shamans traded in their drums for an Alexa-powered journey, they'd lose something vital: authenticity. Ancient rhythm wasn't just about the sound. It was the whole experience. The drum's tactile feedback, the communal vibe, straight-up sweat and soul mix. It's like comparing a live concert to a recorded track. Sure, technology is nifty, but can it really replace the raw, primal connection of an actual shaman shaking the earth with a rattle? Seems we've got this urge to digitize everything, yet some things, a thunderous heartbeat echoing through your entire being, that might just be downgradable by tech. So, picture a shaman with AirPods. I don't know, Simon. Feels like we're losing the plot, right?
You're spot on, Joe. There's something about the analog nature of those shamanic practices that digital just can't touch. Like it's about community, a collective energy. You resonate with the people around you. It's a shared spiritual Wi-Fi. And we shouldn't forget, the making and playing of these instruments are rituals in themselves. When a drum is handcrafted with intention, played with purpose, packed with the culture's spirit, how does an MP3 compete with that? You can quantify beats per minute, but you can't quantify the spirit poured into each drum hit. Plus, the varied textures of sound from a real instrument, shaped by human hands, that organic imperfection adds layers to the journey. This experience is less an auditory one and more of a full-bodied, soulful voyage. Technology is fantastic, no doubt, and yes, it offers accessibility, but can it replicate the earthy scent of wood, the warmth of a fire, the intermingling energies of an intent-focused gathering? That's where the true magic might just be, untouched by a skip button or a screen swipe.
Absolutely, Simon. That magic, that raw humanity is unbeatable. Even in our tech-savvy era, something tells me there'll always be a yearning for the authentic, the tangible, the spirit of the drum circle over the convenience of the play button. Makes you wonder, What other ancient practices are we glossing over with glossy screens? But hey, that's a conversation for another day. What rabbit hole should we tumble down next?
But the big question remains, Joe, can the crunchy grooves of ancestral beats really jive with sleek silicon chips and our modern wellness craze?
Modern wellness trends like those binaural beats and sound baths are groovy, sure, but translating the authentic thump-thump of a drum into a digital beep-beep, there's got to be something lost in translation, Simon. Today's tech has its perks. It's accessible, precise, perfect to chill with after a long day. However, can it replicate millennia of shamanic tradition? Can it embody the soul, culture, memories etched into every fiber of a handmade instrument? I'm skeptical. These audio-induced healing ideologies, they're definitely onto something. Healing through sound isn't just hippie hype, there's science-backed merit. But shamanic frequencies wrapped up in spa packages might miss the mark. It's like reading about a country and saying you've traveled there, info without experience. Let's not water down profound cultural practices into a commodified wellness experience. Granny's chicken soup for the soul shouldn't become canned stock on a health food aisle. Some essence gets lost when big business boils it down. That's my 2 cents. What do you think?
Whoa, hold up. Binaural beats and sound baths? That's a thing now? Talk about trying to bottle up the thunder. So they're taking these age-old shamanic vibes and smack them into our modern Zen gardens, huh? Wild. I get it. We all want that slice of peace pie, but it's like swapping your grandma's Thanksgiving dinner with fast food. Might curb the hunger, but the soul's left growling. Shamanic frequencies had this whole organic heritage restaurant vibe compared to the fast food chain of binaural beats. Sure, tech gives us a taste, but that authentic recipe? Nah, not so much. It's more than healing. It's identity, culture, and connection. A three-course meal tech just can't cook up. We're in the era of instant gratification, microwaving spirituality like last night's pizza, making me wonder if we're nourishing or just numbing. Looks like our quest for convenience might have cut the line to deeper transformation. Man, what a trip.
Absolutely, Simon. So do you think there's any room for the sacred in our speed dial spirituality? Can these modern methods hold a candle to ancient shamanic practices, or are we just scratching the surface?
Speed dial spirituality? Nailed it, Joe. Just scratching the surface, I'd say. The sacred's not easy to dial up on command. Ancient practices had layers, community, steadfast dedication, sometimes a whole lifetime of mastery. And that silent knowledge, the nonverbal communication with nature and spirit, tough to get that from a gadget. Our modern methods, they've got potential, sure. They help people find their zen in the buzz of city life. But compared to shamanic journeys, they're like those inflatable kiddie pools versus the deep blue sea, you know? Can tech truly translate ancestral wisdom, that oral alchemy? Maybe to an extent, but there's much more beneath the surface. Our well-being isn't just about feeling relaxed, it's tied into understanding ourselves and our place in the grand tapestry. So while our gadgets might give us a peek, they can't take us all the way to the mountaintop. There's a difference between a snapshot of a forest and wandering through the trees yourself.
Spot on. Modern tech can indeed play a role in wellness. Don't get me wrong. It's not about dismissing these tools outright. They have their place, offering ease and potentially broadened access to stress reduction methods. Tools like binaural beats do leverage the concept of entrainment. That principle stems from ancestral wisdom, though in a different package. The primary distinction is context and depth. Shamanic practices are embedded within cultural narratives, spiritual philosophies, and profound personal transformation. A sound bath session at your local yoga studio can be refreshing, but it likely lacks those layers of traditional learning, community folklore, and the transmission of ancient rites through generations. It's about striking a balance, acknowledging the worth of modern interpretations without diluting the potency of their roots. Can we respect and preserve while we innovate? That's the critical piece of the puzzle for genuine oral alchemy in the sphere of modern wellness.
But playing devil's advocate here, Joe, modern tech isn't just about dilution, it's also about evolution and adaptation. Maybe we're not nuking tradition, perhaps we're remixing it to fit our context. Isn't adapting what humans do best? Take binaural beats. They are not a carbon copy of shamanic practices, but they draw from the same wellspring of knowledge, the power of sound to alter consciousness. They're rooted in the neurological fact that certain frequencies can influence brainwave patterns, which could lead to reduced anxiety, enhanced focus, or even deeper meditation. Now, traditional contexts had their place in time. Today's society demands different access points to similar states of well-being. The essence remains. The methods adapt. We live in glass and steel jungles, not under leafy canopies. So the shift towards using tech to harness these principles. It's about keeping pace with the urban drumbeat without losing the original rhythm. Modern methods aren't here to replace, but rather to serve as bridges, portals for those far removed from ancestral lands and ways. These sound-based therapies, verified by research and tailored to today's lifestyle, offer valid pathways to tap into that age-old wisdom. And who's to say that's not just another form of cultural survival, keeping the spirit alive in silicon instead of solely in skin?
You've got a point about cultural survival, but I wonder, Simon, if we're evolving or just revolving around convenience. Are we truly adapting the spirit of these traditions, or are we just slapping a modern label on something timeless to make it sell? Let's not forget, every bridge has two ends. Where do we really end up when we cross this one?
Right. So shamanic chants, they've got this mystique, right? Deep, moving. But what about when things get lost in translation? Ever think how they'd play out as ringtones or hold music? Please wait. Your spirit guide will be with you shortly.
You know, that reminds me of this time I was at an airport lounge waiting for a delayed flight. The place was using what I'm pretty confident were shamanic chants as their background music. I kid you not. It created the most surreal atmosphere. People were milling about, looking for power outlets, chowing down on complimentary snacks, all while this deep spiritual hum echoed through the speakers. And then, mid-chant, an announcement breaks in. Now boarding at Gate 5. It was this weird mashup of the profound and mundane, like we were all being summoned for a mystical journey to Cincinnati. I guess someone thought it was just the stress-free vibe travelers needed, but it ended up feeling like a summoning ritual for weary souls dragging roller bags. There's something hilariously jarring about connecting with your ancestors in one breath and then sprinting for your gate the next.
Oh, man. So you're telling me the path to enlightenment runs through Terminal B? Makes you wonder if the person who picked that playlist knew what vibe they were going for. I picture someone accidentally grabbing their chill shamanic beats instead of elevator top 40. But seriously, how many passengers were sitting there thinking they'd reached a higher plane when really it's just flight delays and mediocre coffee on the horizon? There's something wildly hilarious about mixing the divine and the daily grind. It's like if your GPS started giving you directions in ancient tongues. Turn left at the next life lesson. Not quite the shortcut we had in mind, is it, Joe? And let's be real, would you feel more relaxed with accidental ancestral advice while trying not to miss your connecting flight? That boarding call mid-chant, now summoning all spirits to depart. Yeah, no joke, they've boarded early. Using sacred sounds as a backdrop for baggage claim, guess they were aiming for uplifting, but ended up with confusingly profound.
Absolutely, it points to this growing trend where anything vaguely exotic or spiritual gets co-opted into everyday life without much thought. Remember that ad with the faux chant for a burger joint? Like, reach nirvana with our new deluxe cheeseburger. Talk about a misapplied mantra. The disconnect between context and content leads to these absurd moments. It makes you think, are we trivializing something sacred, or is everything fair game for a gag in our meme culture world? Sure, mishaps are funny, but there's a fine line. It goes back to navigating modern life. There's respect, there's humor, and somewhere, wireless earbuds tangle them up into an ironic soundtrack. Keep those earbuds untangled, folks, lest your sacred chants become your next Zumba track.
Well, that's the charm of our times, Joe. Sacred chants could be one playlist shuffle away from a viral dance challenge. Shamanic shuffle, anyone?
Funny you mentioned that, Simon. Last year, I attended this eclectic wedding, meant to fuse different cultures and traditions, a sort of worldly love celebration, if you will. The couple queued up a variety of global tunes for the reception. It was like musical bingo from every corner of the earth. Enter stage left, the DJ, who's clearly more EDM than ethnography, dropping beats seemingly at random. What should have been soothing Inuit throat singing became the backdrop for a conga line led by Aunt Marge. And let's not even start on the impromptu rain dance led by Cousin Ray, which, as expected, had zero correlation with actual indigenous practices. The highlight? A mishap where a sacred chant playlist was mislabeled as Party Pump Up. Instead of revving the crowd for the bouquet toss, the room goes solemn, vibes turned meditative real quick. There's reflection in place of revelry before someone hits skip. So we've got guests tiptoeing on the dance floor as if they're crossing boundaries between worlds, not just bride and groom's families. Was this invoking ancestral guidance or just stepping on tradition's toes? Who can say, but kudos for the effort. And hey, a little unintentional spiritual enlightenment never hurt any party, right? In those odd pairings of the profound with the party-hatted public lies the amazing, amusing, and sometimes awkward mesh of our fast-paced world with the timeless. It's a friendly reminder, always double-check your playlists or prepare for the shamanic shuffle.
Imagine marrying into that, your I do's, under the watchful eye of every spirit Aunt Marge could accidentally summon. Gives till death do us part, a whole new guest list.
Right. The accidental mix-up of sacred tones at events like weddings underscores a bigger issue. It's often about intention versus reception. The intention might be to honor various cultures and add depth to an event, but without proper context or understanding, it can lead to some comedic, if not slightly awkward, receptions. This melding of worlds shows our willingness to embrace different customs, which is beautiful in its own right. However, it also highlights the crucial need for mindfulness about how we represent and integrate these elements into our lives. So while Aunt Marge sways mystically with the waitstaff, it's essential to remember that each chant, each drumbeat, originates from centuries of tradition. They were crafted with specific purposes, carrying sentiments that can get lost or, in this case, hilariously misconstrued when plucked out of context. These sound snafus shouldn't just serve as comic relief. They're little lessons reminding us that diving into another culture requires more than just hitting play. It invites an exploration into the significance and stories behind the sounds. Otherwise, you risk turning sacred rituals into novelty acts, when they're meant to be bridges connecting us to histories and depths far beneath the surface of our daily lives.
No doubt about it, Joe. They say music is a universal language, but maybe we should make sure we're not just nodding along to a conversation we don't fully grasp. Because there's a thin line between a cultural cocktail and a recipe for an identity crisis. Hold the sacred sauce.
Absolutely, Simon. While we chuckle at these misunderstandings and misapplications, let's pivot to the flip side. Those authentic, transformative experiences that people can have with shamanic sounds. Listener emails have been flooding in with personal tales of deep change attributed to their explorations into tribal tones and sound therapies. We often think of transformation as this big, dramatic shift, yet most stories share something quieter, a profound internal journey sparked by ancestral rhythms or melodies. It's an intimate dance with vibrations that reverberate through the body and soul, sometimes passed down through family traditions or discovered anew amidst the cacophony of our globalized world. This is where the rubber meets the road with cultural authenticity versus globalization. How do we treasure and pass on these potent experiences without watering them down? Vibrations are borderless, but their origins are rooted in place and time. Keeping that integrity intact is paramount. So, reflecting on our listeners' stories, it becomes clear that the relationship between sound, self, and spirit remains as powerful as ever, even amidst the modern noise. The conversation truly begins when we listen not only to the music, but to each other's encounters with these vibrational voyages. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How far can these traditional echoes reach into our lives today as we grapple with preserving them for tomorrow?
Absolutely. These stories are like soul food. But you gotta wonder if any of our listeners accidentally transformed into early birds because their tribal alarm clock was a bit too effective. Talk about waking up on the spiritual side of the bed.
Yeah, waking up to the sound of tribal drums might get you out of bed with more pep, but let's not oversell it as a transformation guarantee. Amid these personal narratives about vibrational journeys, it's easy to glamorize this idea of an instant spiritual makeover. We read listener testimonials touting profound growth, but what about long-term changes? Do those morning chants lead to lasting enlightenment or just a rush of adrenaline? Everyone's looking for that quick fix. Download an app, play some tribal tones, and bam, you're reborn. But transformation is complex. It's ongoing work. Maybe we shouldn't be selling the idea of sound therapy in a bottle. Preservation is the operative word here, not only of traditions, but also of their significance. Listener Jenny wrote about using her grandmother's lullabies, steeping them in respect, not just as sleep aids, but as a connection to heritage. Now that's profound. This push against globalization isn't about rejecting its mingling, but asking, how do we safeguard these depths from becoming another consumable trend? It's food for thought in our cosmic kitchen, don't you think, Simon?
Certainly gives new meaning to good vibrations, doesn't it? Makes you ask if your phone's tribal ringtone is keeping you connected or just ringing hollow.
That's a spot-on thought, Simon. It circles back to the authenticity of those vibrations versus their diluted replicas serving as mere reminders, or worse, becoming background noise. Consider this. In the stories we've heard, it's not just about the sound. It's the intent, knowledge, and cultural framework that underpin it, elements often missing from our ringtone culture. There's this sacred space where tradition teaches, heals, or transforms, and what's critical is the transmission of that space through genuine continuity, not just a catchy tune. We need to ask ourselves how technology can aid, rather than diminish, this conveyance of cultural wealth. As we adopt these sounds, they should provoke engagement with the underlying narratives, urging a quest for understanding. This way, those ancestral echoes retain meaning and contribute to personal growth, instead of fading into one more forgettable digital beep in our daily symphony.
So, Joe, what do you think is the key to using technology without stripping these cultural beats of their soul? How can we keep that heart thumping in a digital world?
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Technology has this uncanny ability to both preserve and homogenize culture. It seems the key is in our approach, using tech as a platform for education and genuine connection rather than mere consumption. The heart of cultural beats pulses not just in sound, but in stories passed down, in rituals observed, in respect shown. Modern platforms could and should highlight these narratives alongside the music. We need more than just access. We need context to keep that soul alive. Could technology facilitate virtual spaces mirroring ancient ones, where wisdom is shared, not commodified? Imagine immersive experiences coupling sound with its heritage, connecting users with elders or aficionados who convey not just the rhythm, but also its roots. Whatever path we tread in this digital landscape, maintaining authenticity demands conscious effort, a refusal to let convenience overshadow meaning. Let's use the tools at our disposal to amplify voices within traditions instead of simply broadcasting their echoes. That might just keep the heart thumping amid the pixels and waves, Simon.
Joe, you just reminded me of my buddy Mike. He's about as techie as they come, always glued to the latest gadget. But he took a trip down to South America last year, trying to find himself, or so he said. Ended up at this retreat in the middle of the Amazon, completely unplugged. I'm talking zero Wi-Fi, Joe. So there he is, Mr. Digital, suddenly forced to march to the beat of a different drum, literally. The tribe there took him under their wing, introduced him to their ancestral music. No app for translation, just raw sound washing over him. He comes back with this wild look in his eyes, and he tells me how those tribal rhythms reached into places no smart device ever could. It was like they rebooted his soul. He still loves his gadgets, but keeps this wooden flute on his desk now, sort of a reminder of that connection. Shows you, technology can take us around the world in seconds, but sometimes it's the ancient beats that truly transport us. Goes to show that while tech bridges distances, it's those deep-root traditions that really bridge gaps in us.
That's classic Mike, finding more bandwidth in the jungle than on his fiber optic line back home. Makes you wonder what kind of updates we all might get from unplugging and tuning into those organic rhythms. Could be the next big software update for humanity, sans silicon.
Heck, imagine if unplugging became the new trend. Next thing you know, we've got digital detox cleanses selling faster than hotcakes at a syrup convention.
We laugh, but there's something to be said about the draw towards these unplugged experiences and their effects. It brings up the topic of sound therapy, not just as an escape from our overstimulated lives, but also for its potential healing properties. Sound has been used in various cultures for millennia as a tool to promote healing and well-being. Now science is beginning to dig into how these ancient practices might actually affect our bodies on a cellular level. Whether it's through binaural beats or the resonating tones of a tuning fork, there's evidence suggesting these vibrational therapies can make real, positive changes in our health. It's a fascinating intersection between the old and new, where traditional knowledge meets modern research. So let's unpack that a bit more. How does this vibrational medicine work? Can modern studies give credibility to what ancient wisdom has been saying all along?
Sure, sound therapy sounds all sciencey and promising, but let's not forget to ask the tough questions, like where's the line between science and wishful thinking? Every day there's a new study, but not all of them hold water under serious scrutiny. Take binaural beats, for example. Some swear by them for everything from stress relief to improved focus. Yet in some cases, this might just be a placebo effect dressed in fancy audio files. And what about those tuning forks and singing bowls? Sure, they've been used for centuries, which does suggest they're doing something right, but we can't just ride on historical coattails. Modern studies on cellular health? Fascinating, absolutely, but also ripe with complexity. How sounds interact with our cells is like throwing a pebble into a pond. Sure, it makes ripples, but are we sure about what those ripples do? Too often, we grasp at promising results without waiting for thorough peer-reviewed research that can replicate findings consistently. So yeah, let's dig deeper into vibrational medicine. Let's embrace the possibility of healing through sound, but stay sharp. Critical thinkers too. Because let's face it, when it comes to our health, we want the real deal, not just a tranquil melody giving us the illusion of wellness.
Absolutely, critical thinking is key. But imagine for a second if we could unlock the full potential of sound therapy, like tuning an instrument, fine-tuning it to address not just stress but physical ailments. Now that would be music to our ears.
Yeah, and if we get it just right, maybe our cells could start dancing to the sound too. Talk about a cellular boogie-woogie.
The idea isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. The cellular boogie-woogie is a nice way to picture what researchers are looking into. They're exploring how specific sound frequencies may influence cell movement or promote healing. It's not just about bopping cells, but about understanding the mechanisms at play. How can frequencies potentially affect pain perception or enhance post-injury recovery? Sure, it's early days with much yet to prove scientifically, but the potential for targeted sound therapy applications could be revolutionary. With any luck, future research will give us clearer answers and maybe even a playlist for our physiology that really does make those cells dance in the most beneficial way possible.
So with sound therapy, we're talking about maybe tinkering with our inner workings using different tunes. What do you think is the biggest hurdle for this kind of research in getting from cool concept to doctor's office treatment?
The biggest hurdle's gotta be solid, repeatable science. Cool concepts are a dime a dozen, but until we've got consistent peer-reviewed studies showing clear health benefits, it's gonna stay on the fringes. Plus, convincing the medical establishment to adopt these therapies without hard evidence is like trying to knock out a heavyweight with one arm tied behind your back. It's not gonna land unless you've got the power of proof behind it.
Absolutely, Joe. The hardcore medical folks won't touch sound therapy with a 10-foot pole unless you hit them with hard facts and figures. Plus, we've got to crack that tough shell of skepticism. People hear sound healing and they think it's all just woo-woo nonsense. It takes serious, rigorous studies to shift those views. To spice things up, let's say we do nail down the science. Is the next step convincing insurance companies to cover our healing playlists? Heck, prescribing Beethoven for heart health or Metallica for motivation. We're in some uncharted waters here. Could be a wild ride if this ship floats. But without the concrete evidence, it's like singing in the rain. Feels good, but doesn't change the fact that you're getting soaked.
Convincing the insurance companies is a beast of its own, Simon. Beyond proving sound therapy works, we'd need standardized treatment protocols too. Like, what's the dose of Mozart you need for stress relief? How many decibels of Tibetan bowls to alleviate chronic pain? There's also the personalization factor. What works for one person might not for another. Research has to account for individual differences in how people respond to sound treatments. And let's not forget regulatory hurdles. Before insurances even look at it, sound therapies have to clear safety and efficacy benchmarks set by agencies like the FDA. It's a labyrinth of hurdles. But hey, if the science proves solid, it's a health revolution worth waiting for.
Right on, Joe. Navigating that maze is tougher than teaching a cat to bark. But if it works, it'd be groundbreaking. Let's see what science says.
You know, this reminds me of a story about my pal, a guy named Kurt, stubborn skeptic, if there ever was one. Anyway, he's been dealing with insomnia like you wouldn't believe. Tried everything, meds, therapy, you name it. So one day, just for kicks, he picks up this old guitar. Can't play a lick, but starts strumming random chords each night. Lo and behold, he starts sleeping better. Now, Kurt doesn't do coincidence. He delves into studies on string vibrations and brainwaves, searching for the why behind his sudden nighttime nirvana. Whether science backed it or not, those strings did something for him. No claims that it'll work for everyone, but for an insomniac with more than a pinch of doubt, that's as good as gold. Sometimes the harmony we're looking for is literally in our hands, just waiting to be played out.
That's a cool story, but you've got to look at Kurt's experience with a grain of salt. Maybe it's not the guitar cure-all itself, but the routine and focus that come with it. There's this thing called the placebo effect. Kurt believes the guitar will help, so his brain says, okay, let's get some shut-eye, without any actual science jazz involved. And hey, strumming can be meditative, right? It's a known fact that calming activities before bed improve sleep. Could be that his DIY jam sessions are just a funky form of meditation. Without hard data saying the strings themselves are causing the Z's, Kurt's nightly concerts might just be his unique way of unwinding, like counting sheep with a soundtrack.
Yeah, the mind is powerful like that. So tying it back to the sound therapy talk, do you think it's the specific sounds or rhythms themselves that could be therapeutic? Or is it more about how Kurt's personal routine of playing guitar creates a calming effect?
For sure, there's science backing up both sides. Research does show particular sounds and rhythms can influence brain activity. It's all about that brainwave entrainment. Binaural beats, for example, are sound waves that can potentially encourage our brains to slip into states of relaxation, focus, or even deep sleep. But on the flip side, personal routines and rituals hold their own power. They give us control over our environment, cueing the brain to chill out or gear up. Consistency in those routines tells our body what's expected next, like Pavlov's dog, but with less drooling. The therapeutic edge comes from a combo platter. The sound holds your hand to get you started, and then your routine keeps you walking forward. It's syncing up the external tunes with our internal rhythms that leads to those moments of zen Kurt stumbled upon.
It's fascinating. Sound strikes a chord with both biochemistry and our daily rituals. Harnessing its healing potential could be a game changer for wellness. Next, could the future hold a personalized health playlist? Stay tuned. This conversation is just getting started.
Speaking of wellness playlists, ever heard of vibroacoustic furniture, Joe? It's like your recliner and subwoofer had a baby, claiming to massage you with sound waves. Now that's a literal sound chair. Could that be the super cozy future, or just another pricey gimmick?
A sound wave massage in your living room sounds straight out of sci-fi, doesn't it? But honestly, vibroacoustic furniture might border on gimmick territory. It's one thing to enjoy a novelty buzz, but quite another to rely on a chair for health benefits. The supposed perks, like stress reduction and pain relief, are often reported anecdotally, lacking the robust clinical evidence you'd want for such claims. The psychological effects can't be discounted either. Belief in the tech could induce placebo responses, making users feel benefits just because they anticipate them. And as for incorporating tech into furniture for health, I'm skeptical. More screens, buttons, and apps aren't what we need. Sometimes good old-fashioned comfort trumps vibration therapy. So before we deck our homes in high-tech furnishings, let's sit back and demand some proof.
I'm with ya. While the buzz of vibroacoustic furniture might give some folks a chill vibe, I'm tossing a skeptical flag on this play. Just because your couch can vibrate to Beethoven doesn't mean it'll cure what ails ya. Let's be real. If all we needed for good health was bass-heavy furniture, we'd have thrown out the veggies and hit up the electronics store ages ago. And let's talk about the cons here. These techie thrones are like putting a mini concert hall in your living room. What happens when the novelty wears off? Are you left with an overpriced nap spot? You mentioned screens and buttons, more tech headaches waiting to happen. Half the time, these things come with manuals thicker than a novel. By the time you figure out how to use it, you've forgotten why you wanted it. Without the cold, hard science to back it up, buying into the hype feels like tossing your spare change into a wishing well. Sure, it might feel good to throw, but don't hold your breath for that splash to clear up your back pain.
All right, folks, that wraps up today's cosmic journey of thoughts and tangents here at Infinite Podcast. Thanks for lending us your ears and brains. Remember, a little skepticism can be a well-oiled hinge on the door to knowledge. So keep questioning, keep laughing, and most importantly, keep coming back for more. We'll fire up the mics again tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern sharp. Don't miss out. We've got another batch of bizarre and brain-tickling topics to dive into. Catch you then.